Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted this morning to be in conversation with Adam Brown, who is Sir David Brown's grandson. And we're going to be talking this morning about the businessman, the business, and the private man, and then also how Adam and his father were part of the business too. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat window. And Joe wanted me to remind you that the meeting is being recorded, and in due course, when it's been edited and tidied up, it'll be available on the club's YouTube channel. So hopefully everyone can hear me well enough, and hopefully you can see. No, you can't, can you?
I can see the picture.
You can see.
Can you all see me? That need to.
Can everyone see the picture of David Brown?
Absolutely.
Thank you, August. Good. So this is the man we're talking about, Sir David Brown. Probably at this point, around that time, he became knighted. But before we talk about David, Adam, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us how you're involved with the Brown family.
Okay, thank you. So I'm the second son of David Brown's son, who was David Brown as well. And my elder brother was David Maxwell Brown, but I'm Francis Adams. So being the second son, I'd have been going into the church, I expect. So yeah, so I knew my grandfather, as soon as I could remember anything, and he was a great chap. And I eventually ended up working in the business, but we'll talk about that later. So yeah, that's David Brown, Grandpa Brown to me.
Okay. So who's this fine-looking chap, Adam?
Well, he must be my style maven. That's the original David Brown, who founded the business in 1860 in Huddersfield, which is where I live to this day, nearby. Do you want me to just maybe say how he started?
Yes, please do.
Okay. He was a wood pattern maker, not an engineer per se. So he carved out the wooden patterns which were inserted into the sand, taken out, and then you'd pour in the mold. So, and he was an extremely hard worker, very hard taskmaster. I think he injured his hand very badly in a bandsaw, and so he didn't live into ripe old age. But that's the original David Brown.
Okay, so he formed David Brown Limited back in 1860.
Correct.
And what was the company best known for?
Well, at this stage, just wooden patterns, mostly for gears, as it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So the next step was really taken on by his sons, Frank and Ernest and Percy. And the next step is going into gear cutting. Sorry, excuse me about this. Sorry.
Hello, your call cannot be taken at this moment. So please.
Technical hitch. So yes, so the two sons got into gear making. I'm not sure exactly how, but they went and bought a machine, a gear cutting machine from America, a Brown and Sharp gear cutting machine. So we're moving inherently from casting the gears, which are clunky, to cutting the gears, which are nice and smooth and involute and transmit power properly. So just to put that into perspective, this was the same time as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were fighting away. My great grandfathers were buying gear cutting machinery from America, I have to say, for our American friends.
And what were all these gears used for?
Well, these now were expanding into every aspect of industry. If it needs to rotate, it'll have a gear in it, and it goes from heavy gearing for mills to small gearing for cars, and the whole spectrum from a small cog right the way to a huge cog as time progressed. But it was very much a time of industrial expansion so we're talking about 1900 to 1930s, 40s. It was a metal time, definitely.
Presumably, it's a very profitable business because, you know, being a northerner at heart myself, the number of David Brown Limited businesses around the north was huge.
Well, it grew very quickly, but mostly under my grandfather.
Right.
Under Frank Brown, it pretty well was located at Parkworks Lockwood, which is a few miles away from where I am now. And indeed, it was absolutely full, chocker full. And young David Brown, a grandfather, realized that the clouds of war were gathering in the 1930s. So he went off and bought a site at Penistone, which I can quite literally look out of my window and see, for 11,000 quid in 1936. And that was very much the steel area for the business. So that was that one. Then there was various businesses over in Lancashire, Salford Gears, and various other places. Yes, so there were lots of them proliferating around the place.
A growing empire.
Yes.
So then let's talk about your grandfather. When did the David Brown that we think of come along?
Well, he was born in 1904, 10th of May, if I remember rightly, because I certainly didn't dare forget his birthday. Yeah, and he had a local childhood. He was dragged around the business by his father every morning, well, every Sunday morning. He went to Rossall School, which was a tough public school, but before that, he was at St James's, Almonbury, which is just down the road. And so he pretty quickly was immersed in the business, and he was taught by the best engineers of the time, which at the end of the day meant that he had a very good grasp of engineering, and of course became a fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers in his own right. He did write a book on gearing, which I have not got. If anybody has, I'd love to read it and find it, which is about the basic principles of gearing. Now, one of the things you must understand about anybody like David Brown is they usually have an ability to reduce everything down to the salient facts from which you can make a decision. He did not want clutter or plethora, and he would always say to me, if we'd got a problem in the business, I had to reduce it to one side of A4, and that's all it had to be, no matter how complex it was. And thereby, by that discipline, very much, you would usually come to a reasonable and proper business-like decision.
Sounds like a good business plan.
Yeah. One side of A4 only.
And he liked speed himself. He rode bikes, and this is a picture of a car he built himself, I believe.
Yeah. So early on in his life, he raced motorbikes, and he had his first wife was called Daisy Brown, and Daisy actually sat in the sidecar. You know, you can imagine the 1920s, 30s buzzing around with man and wife zooming around. It sounds fantastic. But he pretty quickly went on to four wheels, and he built this car in company time, very much against his father's wishes. Now, be under no illusions that Frank Brown, who was a real hard taskmaster, you know, he did not take prisoners. Allegedly, he found somebody standing around idly by. He said, "How much do you earn a week?" He said, "5 bob." He said, "Here, and bugger off." And the bloke didn't even work for David Brown's, but there we are. That's the story. So Grandpa was busy building his car in company time, and he concentrated on the engine. He said, "I concentrated on the engine, and I thought everything else would come to hand pretty well thereafter." That was his view.
And presumably had all the facilities at work to build whatever he needed to build.
Yeah, but it was all on company time, so I think there was a big fallout between Frank and David, but it survived. Yeah.
And then this is a well-known racing car, the Vauxhall.
Yeah. So he he managed to, it was something to do with him making some blower gears or something, but he managed to persuade somebody, was it Raymond Mays or somebody, to lend him a kit car, more or less, and he built it up and raced in his own right. I think that's Chelsea Walsh. I could be wrong, but what I think could I draw to the watcher's view is look at his mechanic. The poor chap looks like he's just had a death-like experience. And if you're driven with Sir David, you'd know it wouldn't be far wrong either. Yeah. No, he was a very, very. By the way, he was a super driver. I remember as a young boy him driving me in the four-door, what looked like the DBS, but it was the Lagonda at the time, and doing 140 miles an hour down the M40, and it was just so smooth. He was so smooth, and that's the secret to being a good driver, no question. Yeah, so he was a good driver in his own right.
So father didn't approve, but I gather his mother did.
Well, we think so. Mum was Carrie Brooke, and she drove the valveless car, I think it was. Old Frank never drove. He had a chauffeur always, and so Carrie liked the driving, yeah, and probably encouraged the young David to drive, yeah, definitely.
And as you say, David was a fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. This is his beautiful drawing set, which Adam has loaned to the trust and can be seen in the museum. So when did he get that, Adam?
I think that was his 21st birthday present from Percy. Don't forget, before young David, there was Frank, Percy, and Ernest. Ernest didn't work long in the business. Frank was the front man, if you like, the ebullient pusher, and Percy was the thinker. And Percy, great uncle Percy, would always say, "Now let's just sleep on it." So he gave that other angle of business thought, which my grandfather would often say to me. But coming back to this lovely drawing set, which Grandpa may well have drawn the car. I think he was actually younger I think he was 17 when he made the car. But just think that was a beautiful drawing set, and he used to sit up at night drawing. So yeah, fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
So very much a hands-on engineer, not just running a business.
Oh yes, there was nothing like his father. There was nothing there that he couldn't do. You know, Frank was known for walking around the machine shop, taking his coat off and tweaking up the feeds and speeds to get more metal off the metal. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, quite a character.
So when did David join the family business?
Well, I think he was in a position of responsibility by the 30s. So he would have joined when he was 16 or 17. Mm-hmm. But he was, by the 30s, he was already taking on responsibility as a joint managing director. They seemed to do that a lot in those days, make people joint managing directors, mm-hmm. which to me is a bit of a confusion. But because I think Percy had passed away, so really young David came in to help Frank, in effect. Yeah.
And at the other end of the scale from racing cars, when did tractors become part of the David Brown portfolio?
Well, this is a huge story in its own right. And basically Ferguson came to us, to David Brown, to get his gears cut. But he also, I've just read a report by my grandfather, excuse me, which Ferguson had been hawking around everywhere from British Steel or Steel Industries to try and get them to make his tractor. And one could almost say that maybe grandfather fell for it. And anyway, they produced what was called the Ferguson Brown. But it was pretty apparent that this little beast was actually pretty underpowered. Now, Grandpa wasn't happy with this, and because he was hunting at the time, he would often go and see a lot of farmers. And he did. He went out and saw a lot of farmers all over the place. And it transpired that the little Fergie Brown just didn't pull enough machinery, basically. Of course, what Ferguson wanted to do was make you buy his plough, his whatever, to be dragged by his Ferguson Brown. Whereas David Brown said, no, we've got to build a tractor that will pull whatever the farmer wants. He may have a bigger plough or whatever. And so that really was the parting of the ways. And it was a pretty bitter parting of the ways, because Ferguson had already been talking to Ford in America without my grandfather's permission, and going to see everybody, which was not a nice trick at all. So, but not daunted, grandfather set to and built his own type of tractor, the original David Brown, which was ready just as the war broke out, and that was a proper machine that could pull anything, and that's a summation of it all, really.
There's a very good David Brown tractor club based up in Huddersfield at the old Tractor Works, and I'd certainly recommend anybody goes to visit them if you're interested in tractors.
Well, hang on, I'm president of the David Brown Tractor.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, absolutely, and they move. I hope they're going to be finding some nice, smart new premises fitting to the mark. And just looking at that tractor, indeed, 25D, look, grandfather had already got in Italian styling to the front of that tractor. So there was always a question of style. For whatever David Brown did, it was stylish, not just a plodding old tractor. That is a smart looking tractor, right from the word go.
And he certainly dressed very well for ploughing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the camel-haired coat. Yeah, absolutely. But he could do it. The point is, he could do it. I can't say I can plough, but he certainly can. Good.
Adam, just before we move on, I think August has got a question, if you're happy to take them.
Yes, I'll take a question.
Yeah. Hi. It's not a question, it's a statement. My father's mother was English. We are farmers in the Rhine area between Cologne and Bonn. And we had in the 60s Massey Ferguson tractors and 4 David Brown tractors. And the David Brown tractors we had, which were bought on purpose for their precision and their good work, were medium-sized to do the seeding of sugar beets and corn.
Good, excellent. I hope
I very well remember them, and having a DV24 Mark III with the famous David Brown gearbox. I'm very happy, but unfortunately they were sold. I've kept a couple of the other tractors. We have still a Lanz Bulldog and a Porsche tractor I have on my farm in France, but David Browns have all gone. Maybe I can find one day and add it into the bar.
Yeah, well, I highly recommend them to you, especially the old ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, certainly. Only old ones. New ones are too easy.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Right. Yeah, not at all.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
I think we should have a tractor in the Trust's collection.
Well, just speak to Roger Brereton, and I'm sure they'll whisk it down for you. Why don't we try and find this tractor in the picture?
Absolutely, that'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? Yes, because I think this is the David Brown tractor that most of us think of. Generally painted red.
Yeah. Do you want the story? Do you want the story of why it was painted red?
Yes. Why?
Okay, so like any project, it gets down to the paintwork and much worrying about it. But Grandpa had been hunting, and he still had his hunting coat on, and under his hunting coat, he'd got a yellow waistcoat, which is correct dress. So he'd been hunting with the Badsworth, which is quite local to me. And he said, right, we'll paint the tractor red, hunting pink, and the wheels yellow, his waistcoat. And that's why they were red and yellow.
There you go.
that was in the sort of 40s, 50s onwards. And of course, eventually again, brown and white, and that was for the American market. That's another story.
So I guess at this point, Sir David is managing director of the tractor division. Is that right?
Well, I think by then he'd have gone up to being chairman chairman of the whole David Brown Corporation, which sort of sat overseeing tractors, gears, Aston Martin, of course, while we're here. And indeed, to one side, from 1967 onwards, Vosper Thornycroft, which was a public limited company making warships. So at the height, it could be 14 to 17,000 people employed. So he would be the chairman, in effect, of the whole bag of matching.
Indeed, indeed. Well, let's talk about Aston Martin then.
You better do.
So here we have the Atom. So what on earth made him go and buy a sports car company?
Well, I've been thinking about that question. I think at the end, after the war, don't forget, it'd been a very difficult war for anybody to be in charge of anything. Obviously, being a general, but worse. But he was running around, had to produce Spitfire gearboxes, tank gearboxes for you name it, and it was all under pressure, big pressure. And I think when the end of the war came in 45, I think he must have felt a huge release of pressure. In and amongst all that, in the early 40s, 43, he had a management rebellion to deal with who tried to unseat him. So he had obviously wasn't fighting, but he had a tough war. So my theory is this: I think he thought, well, what did I love doing? I loved racing cars. His papa had passed away in 41, so I hadn't got anybody to actually gainsay him. So he just opened the newspaper by chance, as you do, and there was the advertisement. And he didn't know it was Aston Martin until he got there. And he thought, crikey, this is a very smart name. And they lent him the Atom, which he brought it all the way back to Yorkshire. And he drove it all over Home Moss and all the places he used to race as a younger man. And so they've given it a jolly good testing and thought, well, I like it. And I like it, I'll buy it, kind of thing.
So that was February in 1947.
Yeah. So bloody cold. I don't think it wasn't actually the time of the big freeze, which I think was 48, but try and cast one's mind historically back to what were conditions like. There was rationing. It was all coal-fired. The place was dirty. A lot of people had chest diseases. It was a rough, tough time. A lot of people were exhausted, wounded, at the end of their tether, emotionally. And what does Grandpa do? Go out and buy a really smart car business. Fantastic.
And I think it cost £20,500.
I believe that was exactly right. Yeah.
Quite an investment in the day.
Yeah, somebody work it out for me. I don't think.
But that wasn't his only expense in 1947, was it?
Absolutely not. He was approached by the dealer, local scratchyard, to would you come and buy Lagonda because it needs buying basically. And he thought, well, no, I really can't afford that. That is going to be in ridiculous money. It could be something like 250,000. It's way beyond what I'm prepared to pay. But anyway, I think he knew the receiver. Anyway, the net result was, let's put it this way, he acquired Lagonda for about £50,000, I believe. Now, what attracted him to Lagonda was not Lagonda per se, although I would, if I was talking to the Lagonda boys, I'd say differently. But it was really because of the engine. That it was the Bentley designed engine that he wanted. And you know what happened next, of course. That went into the DB24, if I'm right.
Absolutely. So first of all, I've got a nice picture of the first Davy Brown built Aston, the 2-litre Sports, which retrospectively is known as a DB1, but a 2-litre Sports in the day.
Yeah, fantastic, isn't it?
And that's based on the Atom chassis and still has the 2-litre engine. And then the Lagonda engine was fitted when the DB2 came along, and a whole new world emerged.
Well, it did, and look how quickly the man stamped and he didn't stamp in a nasty way, but how he stamped his design flair, because when you look at the next car, of course, his design flair and his knowledge of engineering. And there were perfectly good people like Claude Hill and everybody else working on this car, but Grandpa had that click to go, no, that's unfortunately just not quite good enough. I want it that bit better. I can give you another analogy of joining things like that, making the leap. Vosper, he was involved with Vosper, and they said, "Oh, we need to expand." He said, "Well, why didn't you get the company next door called Thornycroft?" "Oh, we'd never thought of that." Hence Vosper Thornycroft. So this is the incredible thing. So not only can he make everything manageable in your brain to what A4 size, but he can make this leap. Now, that's the incredible thing of David Brown, in my book, anyway.
No, that's a real skill. That's a real skill. So Aston Martin had been based in Victoria Road in Feltham, and that factory was hit by an incendiary bomb, so it was in pretty poor state. The Lagonda factory in Staines, which is now a Sainsbury's supermarket, they had to leave. So where did David Brown set up these two companies to work?
Well, it was eventually. It wasn't, at one point, the Astons were actually made up at Farsley in Leeds for a while, in a big shed. And I went and opened a stone to commemorate that a few years ago. But in due course, of course, he came down to Newport Pagnell, to Tickford and all that. And of course, Newport Pagnell was the home for a good long time. And a good central home, if you think about it, a good place to be.
Well, so before Newport Pagnell, we had Hanworth Air Park.
Of course he did, sorry, yeah.
Bringing them together. And then Newport Pagnell came along when in 55, he bought Tickford Limited.
That's it.
So do you know why Tickford came along? Why did they bring that into the business?
Probably because he probably couldn't get, he probably had a shortage of bodywork, I suspect. And so the only way was to acquire the people that made it, everybody was booming and zooming at this stage. So getting hold of raw materials and a body maker was terribly difficult. So I suspect that was the answer.
Very much the opposite of modern business where everything is outsourced.
Yes,
Here we have a time when if you wanted it, you bought the company that did it.
That's it, yeah. I'm surprised he didn't buy Pirelli as well, or Avon, yeah.
So,
that's fantastic.
And how involved was David in the Aston Martin and Lagonda business?
Well, initially very involved, and indeed he was always involved in all of his businesses. But he did try his best, and something he tried to teach me was to delegate. Now he's delegated this task to some young man, which wasn't me, unfortunately, for which I was a bit upset. This would be 1966 when Her Majesty's Queen came round the factory. So yeah, he was a chairman, and therefore the chairman's role is different from the managing director's role, and as is the general manager's. So it's the chairman's role is to look forward, of course, more than and see what opportunities arise. So, but notwithstanding that, he was very much nicely hands-on, if you know what I mean. He would, when we had the gear business, he'd ring me at 8 o'clock every morning and want to know exactly what the day was holding for me and what the problems were and stuff like that. So
he had an office in Sunnyside, didn't he? So he presumably was there quite frequently.
Yeah, yes. He had offices at Sunnyside, and of course he had the head office was in London, where quite a few Aston Martins were shown, of the Aston that won Le Mans with all the mud on it. Yeah, so, and he had offices at Park Works. So he's, and of course, we'll go on to something later, won't we? To facilitate his movement around his empire, he had planes and helicopters, which we'll have a look at maybe later.
One question which I've been asked at this point is was he a regular driver of the company's products? Did he have Astons and Lagondas in his own sort of personal fleet?
Oh, absolutely. But so did my father, so did my Aunt Angela. We all went to school in Aston Martins. all the time. It was just common. It was just the company car. And what was great is, of course, they changed. We had them for a month or two, and off they went somewhere else. So David did have, I remember his purple Lagonda, particularly towards the end. And when he seemed to keep that for quite a long time.
The repeat.
But yes, he very much, and I can remember a lovely white DB4 possibly, or 5, out in Jamaica when I was 11. So he'd have had that car flown out, especially.
And what about the shooting brakes? They were a personal project, weren't they?
Absolutely. Well, the story is he had a little terrier, Jack Russell Terrier, called Samson, who was a bit feisty. And I think when Sir David changed gear, he used to bite him. So Sir David got fed up with that. And so they decided to better have a shooting brake so little Samson could go in the boot. So that's what happened. And hence you've got 11 shooting brakes made. All because of little Samson biting grandfather.
Excellent idea. Excellent idea.
Yeah.
So around this time, he was knighted. So why did he become Sir David? What had he done?
Well, he really was, a leading employer in the country. You could have argued he should have had his knighthood at the end of the war, and there may have been reasons why he didn't that I don't know about. So in my book, he was well due for a knighthood. And I think they got the Queen's Award for Exports and everything. So it all sort of happened at once. It was regrettably under a Labour government, but who am I to say? But he got his knighthood, and I think justifiably so. I think in 1968 or something like that.
68. Yeah, 68. And I think the citation is for services to industry.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a positive understatement in my book. Yeah. He'd done a super job.
How did Aston Martin get involved in the racing in the 50s that they're so famous for?
Well, grandfather loved racing, as we've already heard, as a younger man. And even when he bought Astons, they were already racing. So it really was a question of, let's go and do some more of it. And of course, he believed, as a lot of people believed, that what you learned through racing the car, you could transmit to the road car, if you like. And we were in the sports car business. We weren't in the family car business. And long may it be so, Aston Martin. And that was very much his view. And he got eventually some good super drivers and some super managers to achieve the great Le Mans win in '59, which is just a super achievement. But
would he have driven the cars himself? Was he sufficiently skilled to take a DBR1 out on the track?
I don't have a record of that, but I suspect they're probably too valuable to let the patron go bumping it round. But yes, the answer is I'm sure he was perfectly capable. But whether they wanted to lose the patron and the car is another matter. So, I don't know of him zooming around per se.
He certainly attended most of the races in person, didn't he?
Yes. Oh, yes. And so not only was he running a business, but he was coming and watching races to the best of his ability to support his crew, and he loved doing it. But as I said, you needed a fleet of planes and helicopters to achieve it.
Well, he certainly looks very pleased here to be the winning team.
Oh yes, he actually, the analogy of winning Le Mans, he said it's like getting your pilot's license. When you fly solo, he said it gave me that kind of buzz. Yeah, I think
we're very proud in the trust of the trophies that Lady Paula gave right at the beginning of the trust's life, and they're all was on display. An important part of our collection.
Fantastic, yes, and I'm glad you've got them. It's fantastic.
So here's another Le Mans picture. So who's this?
So this is Sir David's second wife, who'd been his secretary throughout the Second War, Lady Maggie Brown. Now, I don't know, he's just told her that the allowance has gone down or what. She doesn't look terribly happy. But she was a lovely lady. And yeah, they were man and wife for a good long time. And she was very supportive of him in all his endeavours. Yeah, fantastic.
But he had three marriages, is that right?
Yes. In due course, Lady Maggie was traded in, and we went on to Lady Paula. Yeah.
What was he like as a family man and as a granddad, as we have in this photo here?
Well, yeah, he was good fun. He taught you to swim, play polo. He never could teach me tennis, but he would have tried his best. Water ski, he was a very good water skier. In fact, he got very badly burnt in a skiing accident. And he said it was terribly painful. And of course, the speedboat blew up and he was in flames. And of course, there's nowhere else to go but the sea, which a lot of doctors said that was about the best thing, a terrible shock, but probably the best thing he could have done was the salt water probably helped. So he was a perfectly good grandfather. And don't forget, he was quite young. Not only was he young physically, but he was young mentally. He never aged, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it was a jolly good grandfather. Good fun.
So how many children had he had?
He just had two, David, my father, and Angela Abacassis, who married George Abacassis, the famous racing driver. Yeah, so David Brown, or Bill Brown, that's Sir David's son, he had Max and I by one marriage, and then he had Jasper and Candida by another marriage, and then Gussie by another marriage. So he followed in the family footsteps and married 3 times.
Obviously a Brown trait.
No, not. Yes, that's Lady Paula and Sir David later towards the end of his years. Yes, I think that would be something to do with. Do we move on to the D Bean scenario of why it got asked again?
No, I've got some other interesting pictures before we get there. But that board table and chairs is also part of the Trust's collection and can be seen in the museum. And it was Lady Paula that donated the trophies to us, I believe.
That's correct, yes.
So if he was a great family man, he was also very active in his own right, wasn't he? With lots of other passions.
Yes, I mean, as I said, to keep abreast of all the companies, which of course were international as well, Australia, South Africa. He very quickly got his pilot's license in the 40s, I think, and so he was very quick to own planes and helicopters, because he very much believed that time is of the essence. He didn't like to waste time, not a second. He would not stand in a queue for any time at all. So he really used his time very carefully. And that was his argument as to why he should be flown in an executive jet or helicopter. So the executive's not wasting time.
Absolutely.
Which I can totally agree.
Yeah, I think we should do the same.
Yeah, a good idea.
So would he have piloted this himself, or? Yes,
he would have piloted that one himself, yeah. And the normal pilot was a chap called Captain Phil Anscombe, who was a great fellow. But yeah, Grandpa would take the controls.
Great. And yachts too.
Yes, he loved sailing. I think his passion for motor yachts, not sailing yachts, I hasten to add. He bought a motor torpedo boat somewhere along the way. At the end of the release of the Second World War. I think that was called Tishbite, and this one you see here, I think, is Astromar. And he had several yachts over many years, and I was lucky enough to stay on them most summer holidays. So it was a great time. Super.
Mm. And what else did he spend his time doing? Hunting, clearly.
He was a master of foxhounds from the Badsworth in the late 40s. and then throughout the 60s to 70s, he was master of the South Oxfordshire Hunt. And in that picture, Sir David is on the right, as I'm looking at it. And then next is my mother, and then my father, and then Lady Maggie Brown. I still only recently I sold his hunting coat. I used to wear that same coat because I too was a master of foxhound. So yeah. So when he bought something, he bought wisely and well, and and it lasted.
And polo, I believe, was another passion.
Yes, he rather took that up with Bill, his son, who'd come from Palestine, serving in the army, playing polo. And Sir David took to it very well and had his own polo team, who went to Jamaica and played at the Guards and Ham Polo Club. So if you weren't hunting in the winter, you were playing polo in the summer. So you were pretty well on a horse if you weren't in an Aston Martin most of your life, which I was lucky enough to do quite a lot of that too.
So by 1972, the business is more difficult, isn't it?
Life became more difficult, that's right. As British industry declined as a whole, and unfortunately, Rolls-Royce went bust. And I think all the financial guys, the bankers, all said, "Crikey, which other engineering concerns do we own, or do we bank for, or who owe us money?" And of course, there was David Brown Tractors Corporation owing money at that time. So an investigation soon proved that really it would be wise to divest Aston Martin and Tractors, which was, I'm sure, was a heartbreak for my grandfather.
That's what I was about to ask, Phil. Enough, how did he feel about having to part company with Aston Martin?
He was not happy at all, but he understood the rationale, but it had become too much of a drain upon the other companies. It was fine whilst Tractors was doing well, and it was fine whilst Gears and Tractors were doing well. It could be hidden, if you like, but when everything went a bit downhill in the 70s, as it did, then they just spent 12 million quid building what's called the J Shed in Meltham at Tractors. So that was the cause of the bank loan, which would have normally been paid back no problem whatsoever. But the banks felt a bit windy, I suspect, and that was the result, which was a great heartbreak to all the family, I think.
Absolutely, and a big change for Aston Martin with company developments coming along.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet our grandfather was wished everybody well. There was no bitterness at all about it. And he was delighted that Aston Martin continued to survive, and he would be so delighted to see how well it's doing now.
Good. So at what point did he ever really retire? Perhaps he never did.
No, is it? I'd say no, because when we sold the gear business, he was busy with some project or other, usually involving boat building. And towards the end of his life, he had this idea that the way to go boat building wise was to be a catamaran, because of course it's more stable, and water jets. So that his last boat was Flying Sun, which was made in South Africa. And he very much wanted me involved with that, but I didn't actually get involved with that project for him. But yes, so the answer is no, he's not in the retiring mode ever.
That's a good lead to my next question, because both you and your father were involved in the business, weren't you? What roles did you both have?
Well, my father left the business a bit under a cloud because he was about to marry my mother, and David Brown did not approve. So he went off and worked somewhere else, but came back and then worked his way up the business and ended up, I think, as deputy chairman of the tractor business. I I was lucky enough to go to Harrow and Oxford. And when I got my degree, I went and worked for Tube Investments, which way back then was a huge conglomeration, which included Raleigh Bicycles, Creeder, Russell Hobbs, Ackles and Pollock. It's just a massive place, even half of British Aluminium. And it was a great place as a graduate in engineering to go, because you could go from one division to another, and you could go from one discipline. I was in purchasing. That's where I started as a buyer. But you could go to marketing. So they very much moved you around. But Sir David, meanwhile, had moved to Monte Carlo for tax reasons, and he was very bitter with the Labour government for nationalising Vosper Thornycroft, which was nothing short of daylight robbery. This is when Michael Heseltine threw the mace around the place. And the shareholders got a pittance, got nothing. And it annoyed grandfather so much that he up sticks and moved to Monte Carlo. Now, which person would do that in their 70s, you know, up sticks and say, right, I've had enough of this stupid country, which he very much felt. I'm going to go and be a tax exile, and I shall garner he kept the gear business, but he was absolutely incandescent. So that it's not often he would get as cross as that. But you imagine what that must have meant to him to have to move his where he was born and bred.
So you acted on his behalf, did you? Yeah.
So when he moved to Monte Carlo, he really wanted a Brown in the back in the business. So I was headhunted back, kind of thing. And I had to work my way through the business again, just as he had done, as my father had done. Start again, work my way up through it. Became a general manager of one of the small divisions, Della Penna, and I eventually ended up as deputy chairman when we sold the business.
But that's not the end of the David Brown connection with Aston Martin, of course.
No, marvellous.
So yes. We have Sir David and Walter Hayes. So how did this arrangement come about?
I'm not sure of the exact detail, but it's in. I'm sure it's Walter Hayes's doing. He must have thought, well, you know, we ought to have the DB name back. And Grandpa was so proud and so privileged to say, absolutely, let's go back and let's have the DB. And it was so fitting, it was on the DB7, which many people would argue was the saviour car of the enterprise. So it's really Walter Hayes, I would say, we have to thank for that. And we have to thank my grandfather for being so pleased to let it go again, you know, DB again, when he was later in his life. So
I gather it wasn't a financial deal, though.
Not to my knowledge, no.
I think the story is that £1 was paid for the licensing of the name.
Probably, yeah. I don't get. It didn't enrich grandfather, shall we? But I think what would have enriched him was the knowledge that things were going forward, and that's how he was. It was go forwards. He liked to look at the history, but he also liked to go forwards very much.
Well, this picture must be taken in no later than 92, which couldn't have been very long before Sir David passed away. And again, this particular car, which was the Geneva show car, is in the Trust's collection, and people can come along and see it. And we're very proud of all of our David Brown related items.
Good. I'm so pleased. And I know he would be pleased for you to be pleased. Do you know what I mean?
Well, thank you, Adam. That's my pictures and questions, if you like. If anyone else has got any questions they'd like to raise.
Okay. I know that there's been some questions coming in. I know that John Purse has got a couple of questions for you, Adam, if you would.
Yeah. Yes, John.
You have to. I'm not sure if he's muted. Let me just check.
Are you there, Mr. Purser?
Yes, I am. Good morning, Adam.
Oh.
Good morning, John. How are you keeping? All right.
Oh, we're fine, thanks. Hope
Jolly
you all
good.
are. Yeah. I was just interested to know what you knew about the other revolution in the 70s with John Boex, whether you were involved with that.
Yes, I do. I didn't actually touch on it, but it was very much Boex went behind my grandfather's back and rattled the banks again, saying, look, this bloke, David Brown, is in effect incompetent, lost the touch and should be got rid of, as should his son. And I should be your man, in effect. I think that's putting it in a simplistic term. I do have a file here on it. But luckily, grandfather got some help from outside. Was it Sporberg? A few other people like that, and Jack Thompson, and they quickly turned everything round. But by so turning it round, of course, Aston and Tractors had to go. They were like the casualty, but it paid off the debt very quickly. So that was the nub of it, I think.
Thank you. That clarifies an awful lot.
That's all right. Yeah.
John, you had an earlier question right at the beginning. I think it's in the chat about the management and who rebelled from the management.
Oh,
Yes.
that was me again, Adam. The wartime rebellion from the management. Surely that was the shareholders rather than the actual management.
No, there was various elements that management were turned against him, and to solve it, if I've got it right, he had to have an outside chairman, who may or may not, if I remember right, it could well have been Lord Brabazon of Tara, who became the chairman. So grandfather became his MD, and they put these people. They kept their jobs, and interesting enough, they all kept their jobs and subsequently became very good employees of Sir David's. So amazing. You'd think he'd have chopped their heads off straight away, but no, except one had to go. Yeah, I have the names in my head, and that's where they're staying for the minute.
Thanks, Adam. That's again great clarification of what has been a somewhat unknown factor of Sir David's life.
Yeah, not at all.
Thank you, John. What else have we got, Joe?
David Salmon had some questions and a comment upon some tractors and a question for you. I've asked him to unmute, so hopefully he has.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, I can hear you. I can't see you, unfortunately,
yes,
but I can hear you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. I have quite a connection because I've done business with, well, quite a number of things, apart from tractors and things. But I've done business with the company, David Brown, for many years until I retired. And I was interested in your comment about the when he was given his knighthood. Now, I would have thought, in fact, I put a little piece on the chat about it. I would have thought it was given to him for all those services he did with regard to the tank transmissions. I remember in the, I think it was the end of the 80s, maybe early 90s, he was still making the gearboxes for the turrets. And I did a little bit of subcontract supply to them. I forgot what it was, actually. It was some spirals and that. So I would have thought he really should have deserved that knighthood at the end of World War II. So I was a bit surprised it took so long for him to him to receive it.
You're right, because the two gearboxes were particularly important. The Spitfire gearbox in the Battle of Britain, which of course everybody should know. If the Meltham factory had been hit, Hurricanes and Spitfires wouldn't have those little gears at the front, and that would have been the end of the Battle of Britain. So that was that. But the Merritt Brown box in the Churchill, amongst other tanks, which was tested not far from here. But of course we made the tank gearboxes going all the way through all the other tanks, TN-35s and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so the tank war was very much involved with David Brown and vice versa. So yes, the guy deserved his knighthood any time from from 1950 right the way through. So I think it was very late.
Thank
Hello?
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not at all.
Brilliant. I think that's all the questions from the chat room. So I don't know if anyone would just like to just ask verbally.
Just to dive in about the knighthood, of course, immediate post-war years was a Labour government, and I think that may have clouded the who got knighthoods for
True, John.
For making money out of the war, because of course they weren't making Merlin timing gears as a charity operation.
Absolutely not. But yeah, you've got guys like Stafford Cripps and Manny Shinwell who gosh, yeah. So yeah, it's not surprising poor grandfather didn't get a knighthood at that stage, but he did get one in the end, and quite rightly so.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can see that August, you've still got your hand up. Did you have something else?
It's finished.
Oh, you're on mute.
No, there's no more need. I will
Okay,
try to get taken down.
I'll do that for you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's a great pleasure, Adam, to listen to you and to learn more about your family and the involvement with Aston Martin, which has, for me, been always a tremendous heritage and mark, and pleasure to have one or two of them and to be part of the crowd.
Good. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, if that's all the questions, I'd like to thank Adam for his time this morning. It's been a great pleasure chatting away. We're going to be celebrating the 75 years since David Brown bought Aston Martin and Lagonda at the Trusts Festival at Brooklands in August. And at the club's concours, we're going to be celebrating the Aston Martins and Lagondas of the 1950s. So plenty of opportunity, hopefully, to talk to Adam some more. We hope he'll join us for dinner at Brooklands and talk a bit more about his grandfather.
Yeah, a pleasure.
Perfect. On behalf of the Owners Club, I guess it just remains me to thank you very much, Adam, for popping in and joining us this morning, and to Rob for coming along and being our host with the most. And we hope you'll join us again for the next session, which is during the week. The details are on the AMOC website. And to thank you all for coming along this morning and being so interested and lively. So thank you very much.